41. Malfoy's passive talents, knowledge, and happiness. Daphne, you were in the library this morning too? Lucian's sudden question caught Daphne off guard. She couldn't help but remember the humiliation of being chased out by Madame Pince, so she absolutely couldn't admit it. If she did, wouldn't Lucian realize she was the embarrassed student? Ahem, nothing like that. I woke up feeling unwell this morning, went to the hospital wing for medicine, and then returned to the Slytherin common room to rest. Daphne deliberately coughed a few times into her fist, as if to show she was still ill. Her answer wasn't entirely false. She had felt ill that morning and had visited the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey, however, was so effective that Daphne was nearly back to normal in minutes. Since her roommate had already arranged the sick leave, there was no need to rush to class. With time to spare, Daphne had wandered into the library and happened to run into Lucien. When a student gets a sick day, why wouldn't they take advantage of it a little? Lucien, though, looked skeptical. It wasn't that he disbelieved her so much as the girl's flushed face made the story unlikely. Could it be a relapse? And hadn't she seemed energetic in Transfiguration earlier? Tap, tap, tap. Malfoy finally caught up, leaning on his crutches. Graft and I? He'd meant to continue to Lucien, but seeing Daphne, he fell silent. Daphne's eyes lit up at the new arrival. An unwanted witness had walked right into her trap. Malfoy, tell me, did I take sick leave and miss flying this morning? Oh, right. Your roommate helped you ask for leave. Malfoy's head was bandaged and one leg plastered. He looked confused by Daphne's sudden interrogation. Malfoy, when I later returned to the Slytherin common room, I happened to run into you. Do you remember? This puzzled him further. He wanted to say, Big sister, I eagerly went to flying class this morning. How could I have noticed you? But before he could reply, Daphne shot him a sharp look that plainly said, Hurry up and agree. Somehow Malfoy remembered his father's advice. Never argue with someone stronger. The Greengrass family was influential and wealthy. They held sway in many corners of the wizarding world. Indeed, the Ministry's Department of Magical Transportation had long been under a Greengrass. Passive skill, adapt to circumstances, activated. Malfoy nodded. Yes, I saw you when I left. I hope you feel better soon, Daphne. Lucien found the scene absurd. A boy with bandages and a plastered leg offering a worried get well soon to a rosy-cheeked girl? Slytherins were peculiar. These pure-blood nobles were strange. He wondered if he spent too much time around them, would it rub off? It was nice talking to you all, but Professor McGonagall needs me for something, so I must go. Inside Professor McGonagall's office, she led Lucien in and gave him a moment to look around. One wall of shelves was crammed with books, mostly on Transfiguration, including advanced texts and research papers. Another shelf held small objects, delicate metalworks, intricate mechanical tools, and various ores in different colors. Lucien guessed these were practice aids for Transfiguration, used to study material properties and expand the discipline's applications. It had only been a few days since term started, and already he'd visited several professors' offices, a true connoisseur's tour. How are you settling in, Lucien? Are you getting used to Hogwarts? Professor McGonagall asked, her tone softer than in class. Lucien smiled sincerely. Thank you, Professor. Hogwarts is wonderful. There's so much magic and so much I've never encountered before. The students are friendly. The teachers are knowledgeable. I learn something new every day. She nodded, pleased. Good. I thought you might find suddenly entering a world of magic a bit overwhelming. Do you have any questions about Transfiguration? She asked. He thought for a moment. There were many questions, but his immediate goal was clear. He wanted to prepare to borrow the Transfiguration pocket watch and learn semi-permanent solidified Transfiguration. He had no classes for the rest of the day, so he planned to test the pocket watch's effects somewhere. Maybe Hagrid's, and perhaps check on his cabbages while he was there. Professor, I'm very interested in semi-permanent solidified Transfiguration, but I don't know where to start. Professor McGonagall gestured, and a few books and a paper fluttered down from the shelves. Lucien scanned them. Each book dealt with solidified Transfiguration. The paper's authors, however, made him blink. Albus Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. He was surprised. A paper co-authored by Dumbledore and the man said to have created the Philosopher's Stone suggested alchemical influence, not just Transfiguration. Perhaps it was an outgrowth of Flamel's work on the stone. Professor, Nicholas Flamel is the legendary alchemist who created the Philosopher's Stone, right? So this paper— Yes, according to legend, McGonagall said. This paper explores solidified transfiguration, using alchemical knowledge and techniques to refine the process. Lucien felt a thrill. He had worried that he lacked any reference material on alchemy. At Hogwarts, alchemy was an elective reserved for older students, and books were scarce. Some might even be in the restricted section, inaccessible to him for now. The discovery made him all the more eager. Thank you, Professor. I'll study them carefully. They talked a while longer. As Lucien rose to leave, Professor McGonagall smiled almost playfully. Lucien, studying hard is important, of course. But don't forget to relax with your classmates from time to time. Perhaps take a stroll by the Black Lake. Lucien felt a little awkward. She had heard about his walks. He did go out, but his wandering tended to take him into the forbidden forest. He smiled and bowed his head slightly. Yes, Professor. You will be at Hogwarts for 7 years, she continued softly. You won't only learn here, you will grow here. I hope every young wizard can find both knowledge and happiness at this school. 42. Mechanical Transfiguration Pocket Watch. A young man arrives in the dueling world. Happy. So happy. On the edge of the forbidden forest, Lucien swung a metal grappling hook. With a flick of his arm, the claw caught a thick branch. Gears whirred, the line reeled in, and his body shot up into the air. He released the hook mid-swing, sent it to another branch, and weaved through the trees like Spider-Man. He felt like a child with a new toy. When he landed, he stowed the grappling hook and a faint glow flashed as it reverted into a brass pocket watch with a soft snap. He flipped the cover open and studied the face. The dial was divided into 12 equal sections without numbers. Each segment bore a different engraving: a sword here, a shield there, a grappling hook, and a few blank spaces. Instead of 3 hands, the watch had a single pointer, currently resting between the 2 top sections. This was the Mechanical Transfiguration Pocket Watch. Lucien could engrave up to 12 transfiguration spells on it, and they weren't permanent. He could change them whenever he wanted. The transfigurations were semi-permanent. As long as he periodically replenished magic, the engraved effects would persist. Click. He pressed the button on the side, fed a burst of magic into the mechanism, and pictured the object that belonged in that section. Instantly, the watch transformed into a brass shield with exposed gears, large enough to cover his whole torso. The transfiguration was fast, and only needed him to inject magic and imagine the object. Far more convenient than casting transfiguration with a wand. Lucien held the shield in his left hand, drew his wand with his right, and tapped a stone lightly. Confringo! The rock exploded into scattering fragments, the blast sending birds and beasts in the forbidden forest into alarmed cries. Using the pocket watch didn't interfere with his wand work at all. The shield even concealed his figure and could defend against low-power spells or attacks that required a physical barrier. This is how a wizard should fight, he thought. Why always keep one hand empty? He remembered a book about Hogwarts founders that had described Godric Gryffindor as a legendary duelist, skilled in both magic and swordplay. Gryffindor's thing, the story said, was to hold a sword in one hand and a wand in the other, using magic at range and finishing with a blade up close. It made sense. The sword couldn't have been purely ceremonial. Harry had used it to kill the basilisk, Neville to cut off Nagini's head. Producing sword saints seemed like a familial trait of Gryffindor. He switched the shield back into the pocket watch, pressed the button again, and the watch became a metal longsword that gleamed with cold light. Having to revert to the watch before each switch was a minor annoyance, but the transfiguration was so quick he only needed to time it right. He executed a graceful flourish. The sword cut through the air. Aunt Penelope had hired a fencing tutor for him, so the sword felt natural in his hands. Still, he frowned. Close-quarters combat was rare in the wizarding world. Better to keep distance when possible. If pureblood wizards worried about that, they might consider crossbows. But Lucien was Muggle-born and had a different set of ideas. He transformed the sword back into the watch, flipped it open, and pointed his wand at it while thinking, grip, firing pin, rifling, cylinder. When the engraving in that section became crisp and complete, He smiled and pressed the button. The pocket watch vanished, and a brass revolver with clean mechanical lines appeared in his hand. He transfigured a pebble into a bullet, loaded the cylinder, aimed at a tree trunk, and fired. Bang! The charred hole in the bark made him thoughtful. The power was that of a normal pistol, useful but not decisive. In a wizard duel, most people would be behind several layers of protego and other protections. A plain bullet wouldn't do much. Still, Lucien could experiment. He could refine special bullets using alchemy, infusing them with magical effects. He didn't expect to blow off the head of a powerful wizard like Voldemort with a pistol, but if a bullet could create even a small distraction, it might tip the balance in a fight. He looked at his hands, satisfied. Wand in one hand, gun in the other. A youngster arrives in the dueling world. Putting the pocket watch away, he returned to Hagrid's hut. He played with the dog for a while, then picked up a small hoe and went into the adjacent vegetable garden. Past Hagrid's massive pumpkins and plump tomatoes, he reached the corner of the plot, where 2 rows of green sprouts swayed as if greeting him. He had planted 30 Chinese chomping cabbage seeds. The assignment only required 10, but since this was his first time with magical plants, he'd sown extra. Refining potion-based fertilizers and insecticides was easy for him, and between that and the system's daily supply of finished potions, his output was healthy. Even if the extra chomping cabbage couldn't be eaten, they could be disguised and used as hidden weapons. He squatted to inspect the seedlings. Tiny mouths had already opened at the tops of the sprouts, though the sharp teeth hadn't fully formed. Lucien reached out and scratched one. The little opening seemed to grin, as if laughing at being tickled. He applied fertilizer and sprayed herbicide and pesticide, then turned another patch of earth with his hoe to prepare for more crops or magical plants. He wasn't sure whether it was his newly awakened Eastern sensibility or the effect of the diligent little gardener title, but he'd developed a real fondness for planting things. He looked up at the full moon and chuckled softly, shouldering his hoe and heading back to Hagrid's hut under the moonlight. 43. Newt received the letter. Chelan has grown up. It was the middle of the night in Dorset. On an unassuming little hill stood a plain wooden cabin. Inside, a trapdoor in the floor opened and an elderly man with curly hair climbed up from below. Time to sleep after looking at the moon. He gently stroked the niffler cub cradled in his arms, soothing the little creature. Whoosh! A brilliant, blazing ball of fire flared up in the cabin. Before the flames died down, a magnificent red phoenix burst forth. Fox! The man's face lit with joy. He hadn't seen the rare bird in years. Still comforting the startled niffler, he accepted the envelope Fox dropped into his hand. Dear Newt Scamander, how have you been lately? This man with the curly hair and the niffler was Newt Scamander, author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and the world's foremost expert on magical creatures. Newt, it's so late. Who sent you a letter? His wife Tina called from somewhere in the cabin. Newt quickly tucked the unfinished letter away and, instinctively embarrassed, hid it behind his back. Ah, Tina, it's so late. Why aren't you asleep yet? It's from a friend, he stammered. Tina glanced at the phoenix perched on the windowsill and said flatly, It's Fox. Newt almost nodded, then immediately shook his head as if to deny it. Newt had never been good at lying, which both amused and exasperated Tina. She sighed. Newt, if Dumbledore just wants to catch up, fine, but her tone sharpened. When has he not asked you to do something dangerous? Back with Grindelwald. Newt dared not interrupt and mumbled, I actually volunteered. That's always your excuse. You always volunteer, but every one of your actions, every decision, turns out to be part of Dumbledore's plan. Tina scowled. He even says, Newt, do you know why I admire you most? Because you don't care about fame. You only do what you think is right. Please. He's just tricking you into working for him for free. How about this, she added, softer but firm. I'll read the letter for you. I'll read the friendly greetings. But if he asks you to do something dangerous, I'll pretend I didn't see it. Seeing Newt still reluctant, she pressed on. Newt, you're not getting any younger. Our grandson will be going to Hogwarts in a few years. Don't get involved in dangerous things anymore, okay? Newt hesitated, then handed the letter to Tina. She read it, but the more she read, the odder her expression became. She seemed unwilling to believe this was from Dumbledore, but the phoenix, unmistakably Dumbledore's, was real. You'd better read it yourself. She returned the letter to Newt, who read it carefully. Aside from the usual pleasantries, Dumbledore was asking on behalf of a student about the undetectable extension charm and whether it could be used to contain living creatures. Researching the undetectable extension charm, the letter said, Dumbledore's handwriting implied this must be an older student preparing for their NETs. He didn't say which house or give a name, Newt murmured, but it must be a very talented child. Newt knew how difficult it would be to master the undetectable extension charm, much less research using it to house living beings safely. As long as it doesn't involve family heritage, I'd be happy to help Dumbledore and that student, he told Tina, looking up at Fawkes. The phoenix was preening gracefully, as if waiting for his reply. On the outskirts of the Forbidden Forest, Lucien had pushed a little deeper in than the place where he had tested the Transfiguration pocket watch. After asking Hagrid, he had been pointed to a quiet patch of forest where few magical creatures tended to appear. "System, how much longer until little Chillin awakens?" he asked. 1 minute. Lucien began pacing and pulled vegetables, fruits, and herbs from his bag, everything he had prepared for Liu Guang. Chillins fed on the spiritual energy of the plants within those offerings. He also took out a large jar of water from the bottom of his bag. It was pure dew he had collected every morning and evening. The area around Dybrit was often cloudy and humid, which made gathering dew easy. This minute felt like forever. Ding. Pet growth loan fully effective. Chillin Liu Guang has initially entered its growth period. Lucien eagerly released the little Chillin. Boom. Crimson gold flames shot into the sky, filling the clearing with brilliant light. The flames curved around him, passing without harm. Only warmth touched his skin. But everything else was not so lucky. Soil and sand melted and cracked. Trees were swallowed and turned to ash. Lucien felt the terrifying intensity of the fire. A clear, ethereal cry rose from within the blaze. The sea of fire parted, and a majestic spiritual creature, wrapped in auspicious clouds, stepped forth. Tall and slender, its head resembled a dragon's. A pair of short, jade-like horns sat warm on its forehead. Intricate scales shimmered with a faint golden sheen. A crimson gold mane, like drifting clouds, flowed along its neck, back, and shoulders. Its eyes were bright and piercing, like the clearest glass. "Liu Guang?" Lucien asked tentatively. "Master, I missed you so much." The voice, childlike and immediate, filled Lucien's mind. Only moments before the Chillin had been dignified and sacred. Now it bounded forward with the same abandon it had as a youngster and charged into Lucien's arms. Lucien's face drained of color. Rebellious child. He scrambled aside. Liu Guang was no longer small. Its body was larger than a deer's, but smaller than a horse's. It was certainly not something one could pick up anymore. Although its horns were rounded, Lucien had no desire to be headbutted. "Master, do you not want me anymore?" Liu Guang's large, watery eyes looked at him, and the childish thought formed in Lucien's mind. Lucien softened at once. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms gently around Liu Guang's neck, stroking its forehead just as he had when it was young. The Chillin leaned into him, enjoying the attention. Its mane was incredibly soft and warm, comforting him deeply. When he finally relaxed his hold on the neck, his hand remained resting on that warm forehead. "Liu Guang," he said, voice caught between astonishment and tenderness, "you've grown up." Lucien stroked the little Chillin's forehead, feeling the warmth of its short horns. He sighed. "You've grown. I can't hold you like I used to." Liu Guang cocked its head as if understanding, and auspicious clouds swirled around its body. They spun and contracted until, in the blink of an eye, a miniature Liu Guang, still perfectly formed, only the size of an infant, stood on a tiny cloud in the air. It bounced into Lucien's arms and rubbed its head against his chest. "You can change size at will? Is this a new ability since you started growing?" Lucien asked. "Yes, master," the Chillin replied. Lucien was pleasantly surprised by the convenience. He ran his hand through Liu Guang's mane. The texture was magnificent, reminded him of the lion cat he'd had in his previous life. "What else can you do, Liu Guang?" The little Chillin leapt back to its normal size. "Mainly pure flame. The temperature is extremely high. It can burn away most common curses and strong poisons. Oh, and if I don't put the pure flame out myself, it can burn for a very, very long time," Liu Guang added. Lucien watched as the qilin demonstrated. Its small flame incinerated soil, stone, and saplings almost instantly. The heat and purity of the fire were beyond many wizards' fire spells, and it seemed to be able to cleanse malevolent enchantments and toxins. How long the flame would burn without being extinguished, Liu Guang couldn't say. Its mind was still childlike, so Lucien made a mental note to teach it more about time and other basics later. A divine beast should be naturally intelligent, he thought. It would pick things up quickly. For a moment, Liu Guang shivered and released a thin ring of flame around itself, as if trying to warm off an unexpected chill. Lucien's heart missed a beat. That reaction was strong. Did the qilin sense hostility? He was only planning to teach it some common knowledge. He told himself not to overthink it. Divine beasts often had unusual sensitivities. Besides pure flame? Lucien asked. Auspicious clouds, Liu Guang answered. They let me fly and can also obscure vision and dull perception. The clouds under Liu Guang expanded and formed a semicircle around Lucien. Inside, visual details blurred, sounds were muffled, and scents faded. Lucien tested further. He fired a simple spell through the clouds. The connection he usually felt with his magic came through hazy and indistinct. Good. The clouds weakened a wizard's magical perception as well as the ordinary senses. Fighting in an area filled with auspicious clouds would greatly hamper a spellcaster. Master, my scales and hide are also immune to some magic, Liu Guang said. Very powerful destructive magics can still leave traces, but most basic spells don't work. Want to try? Lucien offered, wand already in hand. Liu Guang nodded eagerly, as if this were play. Lucien cast Petrificus Totalis. The spell hit the qilin's flank and sank away like a stone into deep water. Liu Guang remained completely free. Lucien fired a few more spells, everyday charms, jinxes, and hexes, and watched them either fizz against the scales or leave only faint traces. Only stronger, higher-grade magic had any effect at all, and even then only minimally. No wonder the system had compared a divine beast at the start of its growth to an excellent auror. With innate apparition, pure flame, those immune scales, and a malice-sensing instinct, Liu Guang already outstripped many human wizards in terms of survival. Lucien could feel safer sending it into the Forbidden Forest to prelocate creature activity and to act as his scout. If something went wrong, the qilin could sense danger and, if needed, escape. He looked up. The sky had darkened. A full moon hung high. That would be perfect for the creature he'd come to observe. The moonlight turned the clearing silver. Only a few dense bushes ringed the small open space. From one of the burrows at the edge, several peculiar animals emerged. Pale gray, with 2 round eyes bulging from their heads, 4 slender legs, and broad, flat feet. They moved toward the center, and as the moon climbed, rose up onto their hind legs. Under the moon, they began to dance. Their movements were strange and intricate, awkward at first, then fluid and oddly graceful. As they danced, a faint scent of orchids filled the air. The creatures lifted their faces to the moon and leapt and twirled, clearly delighted by the fragrance and the light. From behind a nearby bush, 2 illusory dark green eyes watched, and an equally illusory quill recorded everything. Mooncalf, smooth skin, pale gray, emerges from burrow on full moon nights, dances in moonlight with peculiar attractive movements, purpose of dance unknown, awaiting further observation. Lucien, hidden and scent-masked, checked the small vial of sleeping draught burning gently at his feet before turning his attention back to the mooncalves. He had already cast a disillusionment charm on himself and applied cloak oil to hide sight, sound, and smell. This was his first magical creature record. Every detail mattered: appearance, habits, racial abilities, and the effects of any materials they produced. He would spend the night watching and writing, and before sunrise he intended to collect droppings as well, natural fertilizer for plants, possibly valuable for his experiments with growth potions. He scribbled another note by the dance, likes orchid scent, and added a question mark. Quietly, on a weekend night when other first-year students were asleep in their dormitories, Lucien sat in the Forbidden Forest and watched the mooncalves dance under the full moon. The sky was just beginning to pale when Lucien stretched and yawned. He sat by a clearing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest and rifled through his notebook, checking the notes from last night's survey. The mooncalf's appearance, habits, and other particulars were all recorded. He fed the data into the system and closed the entry. One more magical creature logged. Only 4 left to settle the pet growth loan. He even had a satchel of mooncalf dung. He'd try it as fertilizer on his biting cabbages when he returned. "Glow?" he called. A warm golden shape dropped from the clouds and landed beside him. "Finished foraging?" Lucien asked, rubbing the little Keelan's forehead. "Yes, master," Glow's voice echoed inside Lucien's head. "I found so many vegetables at the forest's edge, yellow, red, green. Their herbal scents were different, some sweet, some sour." Lucien nodded. The forbidden forest really was bountiful. There were more of the plants Glow liked than he'd expected. Perhaps, with some training, Glow could be left to forage on his own. "Oh, and I saw something else," Glow added hesitantly. "A dark dog. When it noticed me, it wanted to bark, but when I looked at it, it began to tremble. It seemed very timid." Dark, a dog, and trembling? Glow's description made Lucien sit up straight. The edge of the forbidden forest with lots of vegetables and a timid black dog could only mean one thing: Hagrid's garden. Had Glow been raiding Hagrid's beds? If so, Lucien would have to apologize. Worse, had Glow gotten into his own biting cabbage seedlings? "Glow," he asked quickly, "when you were drawing herbal energy, did you touch any tender sprouts, small ones with mouth-like openings at the top?" "No," Glow replied at once, sensing Lucien's alarm. "Those seedlings were too small. Their herbal energy was weak. I didn't bother with them." Relief hit Lucien, then melted into wry resignation. Glow had seen the biting cabbage seedlings. That meant the little Killen had indeed been enjoying a buffet at Hagrid's. He surveyed the earnest, naive face looking back at him. "Did I do something wrong?" Glow asked. "It's my fault," Lucien sighed, giving the creature a helpless smile. "If the child isn't taught, the blame lies with the parent. I'll handle this." "What does that mean?" Glow asked, puzzled. Lucien's resolve hardened. Children needed education. He'd better get to Hagrid before anyone else noticed. The edge of the forbidden forest was a good half-hour away on foot. He needed to be quick. He glanced at Glow, about the size of a small steed, and before he could finish thinking, a golden streak burst from the ground. Glow leapt up, took Lucien onto his back, and shot into the sky. Wind tangled Lucien's dark gold hair, but exhilaration chased away last night's fatigue. Better than a battered broomstick. What were Nimbus 2000s and 3000s compared to this? The sunrise poured gold across the clouds as he rode, standing above the world, treading on vapor and freedom. Lucien laughed without restraint, the sound clear in the vast morning. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Cheelan's cry rose, pure and otherworldly. The great wind rises. The note seemed to carry on the wind as Lucien and Glow flew toward the forest. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore and Snape sat across from a pale, middle-aged man with long, light golden hair. Lucius Malfoy's gray eyes glinted with barely concealed anger. "Dumbledore, Severus," he said, "I want an explanation. Why was my son Draco so badly injured in flying class? Multiple fractures. And why is Harry Potter merely listed as having caused the injuries accidentally?" Dumbledore adjusted his spectacles and spoke calmly. "Lucius, we understand your concern. This was a failure of supervision. Draco received prompt care, and Harry has been punished." "Punished?" Lucius cut him off. 1 week of volunteer duty and copying rules 10 times, that's a punishment? A boy who assaults others and abuses potions should be expelled. Snape's expression tightened. "Potter's conduct is reprehensible. I recommended the sanctions applied, but..." The argument continued, each side holding its ground. Lucius demanding harsher retribution, Dumbledore and Snape urging restraint. Then a sound, impossibly distant yet remarkable, threaded into the office. None of them could make words of it, but they all felt its singularness and fell silent. After a moment, Lucius rose. "If it happens again, I will see to it that Harry Potter leaves Hogwarts." He left, his parting words an unmistakable threat. Dumbledore exchanged a look with Snape that said they should try to placate him. When Snape followed Lucius out into the corridor, Lucius was already waiting there, a small, knowing look on his face. Before Snape could speak, Lucius pressed a tiny crystal vial into his hand. Inside, a faintly glowing, slightly viscous liquid clung to the glass. "Severus, have a look," Lucius said. Snape uncorked the vial and inhaled. "Keelan's saliva," he said, surprised. He had not expected Lucius to produce such a thing. A little of that from an eastern Chelan could be worth far more than 500 galleons and was often impossible to obtain without special channels. Yes, Lucius said, from an eastern Chelan. Its secretions heal powerfully. Turned into a potion, they can mend internal injuries completely. You know the infirmary could have helped, Snape said, though he understood the subtext. But if you wish to ensure Draco recovers without after effects, this material is appropriate. Lucius simply inclined his head. He had not outright said the vial was payment for extra care, but he didn't need to. Snape, a potion master, understood the offer well enough. Lucius's posture, polished and imperious, was a familiar one. Wealth and influence were the language of his house. Later, back in his office, Dumbledore pinched the bridge of his nose and drew a folded letter from a drawer. It was a reply from Newt Scamander. He read it again, then turned to the phoenix perched nearby, ruffling its brilliant feathers. "Fawkes," he said softly, "can you help me find a child? His name is Lucian Grafton." Hagrid, that's essentially the situation. Hagrid chuckled after Lucien finished explaining. "No need to apologize to me, lad. Oh, by the way, how are the vegetables I planted? Does your little Keelan like them?" Lucien had slowly grown used to Hagrid's refreshingly direct mind. His first reaction, asking about the vegetables, was endearingly simple. Lucien felt a touch embarrassed by the half-giant's straightforward kindness. "It likes them very much. It really enjoys the taste." "Ha, that's good. Where is your pet now? I don't see it about." "Still playing in the Forbidden Forest," Lucien answered casually. Hagrid nodded and reminded him, "Then tell it to be careful. There are dangerous creatures in there." Lucien thanked him and wasn't overly worried. Between the Keelan's diet of dew and plant essences and the terrifying power of the purifying flame that sometimes flared, the forest was probably at more risk of being singed by Glimmer than of being eaten. Besides, the Chelan was strictly vegetarian. Otherwise, the Forbidden Forest might have become its all-you-can-eat buffet. They chatted while petting Fang. For some reason, Fang, who had kept his distance before, came forward today and leaned into their hands. Had Fang grown accustomed to Lucien from all the visits to Hagrid's? Or had something changed in Lucien over the last 2 days? Before he could decide, a crimson globe burst into being beside the hut and a large red bird emerged. Fawkes. "Hagrid!" Hagrid called immediately. Lucien's thoughts froze. Phoenixes were rarer than any Fantastic Beasts entry suggested. The Dumbledore family was said to have a special bond with phoenixes, and they appeared when a family member needed help. So this was the headmaster's phoenix. Its arrival was spectacular. Hagrid reached out as if to catch the bird, but Fawkes ignored him, flew straight to Lucien, and hovered until it could land on his arm. It felt surprisingly light, large but downy and soft. Fawkes gently rubbed its beak through Lucien's hair, as if greeting an old friend. "Hagrid, is this?" Dumbledore scratched his beard and smiled. "Headmaster Dumbledore probably needs to see you. That's why he sent Fawkes. But I've never seen a phoenix be so friendly with anyone else." "Oh, Fawkes' way of transporting people." Before Hagrid could finish, a wash of flames rose from the phoenix and wrapped them both. The next instant, Lucien found himself in the headmaster's office. "Good morning, Lucien," the old man with white hair and beard said, his half-moon spectacles catching the light. "Good morning, Headmaster Dumbledore." Fawkes still perched on Lucien's arm, preening his hair with obvious affection. Dumbledore looked surprised. He had never seen Fawkes so attached to anyone else. "It seems Fawkes really likes you," he said, smiling. "Old friend, go rest. I have matters to discuss with this young wizard," Dumbledore told the Phoenix. Fawkes ignored him and continued preening. Dumbledore glanced awkwardly around until Lucien patted the bird. At last, Fawkes flew reluctantly away. Lucien was left puzzled. The Phoenix, Fang, both unusually close. Had he changed? Glimmer's recent awakening, or the fact that he was the Keelan's owner, and the Keelan had only just emerged from dormancy in his system space. Perhaps these shifts had subtly altered him in ways animals and magical creatures could sense. He made a mental note to test the theory with other fantastic beasts next time he ventured into the Forbidden Forest. His attention drifted to the center of the room where a glass display case sat, candles shading each corner. Inside lay a patched, cracked, grayish-white hat. "Sorting hat? How did you turn white?" Lucien muttered. "Oh, yes. Someone finally noticed me. The hat began to chime in its familiar grating voice. Lucien, putting you in Ravenclaw was indeed the right choice, unlike that short-sighted boy before. You are very clever, truly the most talented young wizard I've seen in all these years. The Sorting Hat went on and on. Lucien looked at Dumbledore with a question in his eyes. Dumbledore merely spread his hands. Since the last sorting ceremony, it's become much more active, he explained. It talks like this for hours every day. Dumbledore's expression twitched as he remembered his own late-night conversation with the hat. He had only meant to ask about Lucien's character and had ended up buying a glass cabinet and budgeting for monthly hat cleaning. Lucien nodded. After 1,000 years of service, perhaps the Sorting Hat had grown eccentric. Dumbledore waved his wand and conjured a tray of sweets, honey water, lemon drops, licorice wands. Lucien eyed the spread and thought, not for the first time, what a busy old soul Dumbledore was. Lucien, Dumbledore began, this is technically our first proper conversation, though several of your professors have mentioned you. They've said good things, Dumbledore continued, that you are talented, diligent, and modest. That's thanks to the teachers. I'm grateful for their guidance, Lucien replied. He had been about to ask the headmaster for permission to take Defense Against the Dark Arts tutoring from Professor Quirrell. Better to give Dumbledore a heads up, and now seemed like a good moment. But before Lucien could change the subject, Dumbledore surprised him. Professor Flitwick spoke to me earlier, Dumbledore said. He mentioned you wanted to experiment with using the undetectable extension charm to contain living creatures. Yes, Lucien admitted, but Professor Flitwick warned me it's extremely difficult. Dumbledore nodded and produced a letter that drifted into his hand. I consulted an old friend about that, he smiled. His name is Newt Scamander. Have you heard of him? 47. Can you control the dark arts? Newt Scamander, the most famous expert on magical creatures in the world, author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Professor Flitwick mentioned that the Scamander family is very skilled in the application of the undetectable extension charm. Dumbledore chuckled and stroked his beard. Yes, that Newt. I thought you'd be surprised to hear that name. A faint smile touched Lucien's calm eyes. The greatest wizard of our time. No one would be surprised by his acquaintances. Dumbledore laughed heartily and handed the letter to Lucien. Lucien opened it and began to read. The opening lines were blank, probably cordial greetings Dumbledore had omitted, so he went straight to the body of the letter. Using the undetectable extension charm to contain living creatures is not just a simple spell. It also involves transfiguration and even alchemy. If that young man is interested in transfiguration and alchemy, he can start with the following basic textbooks, which should give him some ideas. Indeed, using the undetectable extension charm to build spaces for living creatures was complex. Transfiguration posed no problem for him. Alchemy might be trickier. Analyzing the transforming pocket watch could teach some alchemy, but probably not in depth. He would need to consult the library. Newt had only mentioned creating a single pocket of space. Designing multiple, varied environments at once was likely part of the Scamander's secret craft. Dumbledore had really written an old friend to ask about a new student's difficulty. Tsk. He deserved the title of Hogwarts' greatest headmaster. Thank you, headmaster, for taking the trouble to inquire on my behalf, Lucien said. Dumbledore waved a hand. His bright blue eyes twinkled. Don't mention it. It is a teacher's duty to help students pursue knowledge. Are you getting used to Hogwarts? Lucien nodded. He was getting along well with his classmates, and the professors had been helpful. I've also arranged weekly tutoring with Professor Quirrell to learn practical defense against the dark arts. Dumbledore set down his honeyed water, a flicker of interest in his eyes, but he said without hesitation, He also graduated from Ravenclaw. He's your senior. Quirrell's theories are sound. He may not be the best at communicating with students, but that doesn't affect his teaching. Tutoring should be no problem. Lucien relaxed into a smile at Dumbledore's reply, but a knot tightened in his chest. That reaction wasn't right. Had Dumbledore not noticed Quirrell's problem and simply trusted him, trusted Tom's character? Lucien had raised the tutoring deliberately for safety. Why was Dumbledore so calm? Why did he bring it up at all? Dumbledore changed the subject casually. Lucien, I remember you came from a Muggle family. You must be full of curiosity about the magical world. Yes, that's why I bought many books at Flourish and Blots and borrowed others from the library. They chatted amiably, the atmosphere comfortable. Then Dumbledore asked lightly, "Have you read about a certain branch of magic in those books?" "What magic?" "Dark arts." He popped a lemon drop into his mouth, as if saying the words was no more remarkable than tasting candy. Lucien's mind kicked into overdrive. Dark arts? Surely the dignified headmaster wouldn't ask a new student outright about the dark arts, unless he already suspected something. Could Dumbledore be thinking that what Lucien would study with Quirrell might not be defense against the dark arts, but the dark arts itself? No, that was paranoid. From an outsider's point of view, a student asking a professor for tutoring was normal. Why ask so directly? Wouldn't Dumbledore observe first? Lucien replayed their conversation and the details of his visit to the headmaster's office. The phoenix, the sorting hat. Sorting hat. A line suddenly flashed in his memory. He truly is the most talented young wizard I've seen in all these years. Talent? Could the sorting hat detect a wizard's particular gifts? Transfiguration was his strongest talent, possibly extraordinary. If the sorting hat had told Dumbledore about that, many things would make sense. A mere promising student might not warrant a letter to an old friend, but a pupil the sorting hat had named the most talented I've seen? Then Dumbledore's actions fit. If the sorting hat could sense transfiguration, could it also sense other gifts, another talent Lucien had kept hidden? Dark arts. Lucien had never practiced a dark arts spell at Hogwarts. He had never shown that side of himself to faculty or students. But if the sorting hat had detected a startling aptitude for the dark arts, and Dumbledore knew, that would explain Dumbledore's composure about Quirrell and his pointed question. Lucien looked at Dumbledore, who was serenely sipping his honey water. So Dumbledore had been waiting to test him. Newt's letter was a pretext. The headmaster wanted to learn his attitude toward the dark arts. He had raised the subject to see if Lucien would reveal himself. Lucien steadied his thoughts and chose his words carefully. Dumbledore had only had time to blow on his cup a few times. "I've seen scattered mentions of the dark arts in books," Lucien said calmly. "They're described as terrifying, powerful, and corrupting." Dumbledore inclined his head. What are your thoughts on the dark arts?" Lucien answered in a single measured word, control. Dumbledore set his cup down and regarded Lucien with interest. Control? How would you control it? Lucien met the headmaster's eyes directly, no hesitation in his gaze. "I come from a Muggle background. In the Muggle world, people master knowledge and then use it. When I entered the magical world, I felt those rules might not always apply. Here, knowledge can be power, real, tangible power. The dark arts are powerful, but easy to lose control of. Worse, they can affect a person's character. So the question becomes, are people controlling the dark arts, or are the dark arts controlling people?" He paused, and his look deepened. "Headmaster Dumbledore, you are the greatest wizard of our time. If you were to use the dark arts, could you be sure you would control it 100%? The headmaster's office fell into a long, heavy silence. Dumbledore lowered his eyes and stared at the ripples in his cup. Control. Could it ever be absolute? How many years had passed since Godric's Hollow, 3 hot-headed youths arguing until spells flew. In the chaos, a curse had killed his sister Ariana. No one knew who had cast it. Had those 3 been controlling what they unleashed? Had Dumbledore himself ever truly been in control? The old pain, kept for so long, could now only become quiet. Dumbledore sighed, the honeyed water in his cup long since gone cold. "How about this, Lucien? Would you come to afternoon tea with me once a week? Just to chat with a lonely old man?" Lucien said, and Dumbledore winked as if the earlier awkward silence had never happened. Lucien did not hesitate. "It would be my honor." "Excellent. How about I visit you after my tutoring sessions with Professor Quirrell?" Dumbledore chuckled when Lucien agreed. "Even better. We can compare notes on defense against the dark arts." That was the right response. The tea and conversation were a convenience. The real purpose was to see whether Quirrell had been influencing him toward the dark arts. If Lord Voldemort, weak as he seemed now, could still pull tricks right under Dumbledore's nose, then surely he had always been powerful enough to face Dumbledore openly. Lucien felt reassured. By the way, Dumbledore added, Newt told me you can write to him directly with questions about the undetectable extension charm. Of course. Please don't share his contact, Lucien. My friend prefers quiet, secluded places, Dumbledore said with a little smile. Lucien promised he wouldn't. Newt was an extreme introvert. He probably talked more to his beasts than to people. Besides asking about the charm, Lucien could ask Newt about magical creatures, a field in which Newt was unrivaled. If Lucien hoped to pioneer transfiguration of beasts, he would need to study them first, and Newt was a living encyclopedia. Any other questions? Dumbledore prompted. Without hesitation, Lucien said, Alchemy. I'm interested in alchemy, but the course isn't offered until the upper years. The library only has popular overviews, no practical theory or guidance. I heard Madame Pince say something about the restricted section. He was cut off by a sharp, disdainful voice from the wall of portraits. Ha! This boy wants the restricted section? A first year asking for such dangerous knowledge, truly evil at heart. Phineas, will you hush? Another portrait snapped. Use that troll brain of yours. Wasn't it Slytherin who contributed most of the fresh blood to dark wizards? Lucien glanced toward the portraits and matched the names to faces he'd read about. Phineas Black, perhaps the most unpopular headmaster in Hogwarts history, and Morgan Wiggins, a Gryffindor alumna and author of Dueling is an Art. Phineas was already in full objection mode, no surprise, perhaps, that his tenure had been miserable for students. Heh, Phineas was going on. Those who fell to the dark arts were merely not resolute enough. What has Slytherin to do with it? Albus, as headmaster, you must strictly control the students. Then with a soft thump, Phineas went quiet. Someone had knocked him flat. In the upper left portrait, a silver-rimmed pair of spectacles and a thick book revealed themselves. The woman who had felled Phineas looked every bit the elegant scholar, even with the book still raised. I am delighted to see such a young wizard in Ravenclaw, she said. Lucien stood and bowed slightly. Good morning, Ms. Wenderian. I'm very pleased to be in Ravenclaw. Sharon Wenderian, Ravenclaw graduate, author of Curses and Countercurses, smiled warmly. The young eagles of Ravenclaw should pursue wisdom and master knowledge. You are doing well. Remember, knowledge and power often come together. It's natural to encounter danger and the unknown in pursuit of learning. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Do not try to shoulder everything alone, and don't skimp on consulting Hogwarts teachers. Thank you for your guidance, Lucien said sincerely. May your wisdom continue to guide Ravenclaw. Dumbledore watched the exchange with evident relief. He had seen Lucien's sincerity, his respect for teachers, his hunger for learning. He waved a hand and a sheet of parchment rose up, lines of book titles appearing along with his signature. Take this, Lucien. It should include what you're looking for. Lucien looked it over. The list covered charms, alchemy, herbology, transfiguration, and more. One title in particular made him frown, the identification of dark arts. Why would Dumbledore approve that? To make me cautious, to guard against Quirrell, Lucien thought. The restricted section did indeed hold valuable things, Hogwarts' greatest treasures. He turned back to the headmaster. This book, The Identification of Dark Arts, Dumbledore chuckled softly. Don't worry, it's about identifying the dark arts. It doesn't teach dark spells. Simply understanding the dark arts, or even mastering their theory, won't corrupt you. Only long-term habitual practice and study can cause irreversible harm. Lucien nodded and tucked the list away. It was a pleasure talking with you. I learned a great deal. After he left the headmaster's office, Lucien descended the steps toward the library. First thing, borrow the alchemy books. Then, with Hagrid's help, he intended to analyze the Transfiguration pocket watch and try to stabilize his Transfiguration work. As he rounded a corner of the Great Hall, he saw Draco Malfoy, his hands still bandaged, strolling beside a tall, pale-haired man who resembled him, Lucius Malfoy. Lucien watched them for a moment. Draco's bandage, he supposed, let the boy remind people how Harry had tended him in the infirmary, or to bring up an apology whenever convenient. Draco, Lucius was saying, that arm's still bothering you. The infirmary doesn't live up to our standards, I see. Father, it still hurts a bit. It probably hasn't healed completely, Draco replied. As Lucien passed, someone's glance caught him, a flash of dark green eyes that made his heart inexplicably stutter. He could not place why the sensation was so strong, but the Malfoy family's knack for sizing people up was notorious, and now his curiosity was piqued. Lucius turned toward his son. "I've prepared a rather expensive healing potion for you. It will leave no hidden damage." Draco was about to thank him when Lucius's gaze lingered on the passing student, Lucien, and he asked, coolly, "That student who just went by, do you know him? Tell me about him." 49. Cheelin's saliva. It seems I didn't teach it well. Lucien had only just arrived at Hagrid's hut when Hagrid took Fang to the Forbidden Forest to collect materials. Left alone, Lucien sat flipping through an introductory guide to alchemy. Once he mastered the basics, he thought, he could analyze the Transfiguration pocket watch far more efficiently. "Transformation of matter and the solidification of magic," he read. No wonder alchemy was only offered as a sixth-year elective at Hogwarts. It blended transfiguration, potions, and even Muggle chemical knowledge, complex and demanding. Fortunately, transfiguration itself posed no problem for him. Potions and alchemy were where he already had an A and an A+ in talent. The book's discussion of magic solidification tied closely to semi-permanent solidified transfiguration. Studying both together would be mutually beneficial. In fact, the requirement for the Transfiguration pocket watch, mastering solidified transfiguration or creating an alchemical mechanical animal, could be tackled alongside his alchemy work. Mastering one would feed the other. He remembered Newt's letter too. Making artifacts with undetectable extension charms that could house creatures required a foundation in both transfiguration and alchemy. That was the simplest kind, not the kind that contained multiple separate spaces. Newt's suitcase was practically a miniature world, mountains, lakes, and habitats for many creatures. That was beyond him for now, but he could build simpler containers and partition things into them. He could even set up little experimental platforms inside for potions and alchemy, enabling him to experiment anywhere. The idea pleased him. Time slipped by and evening came. Lucien closed the book and rubbed his neck. "Time to stretch. I'll fertilize the biting cabbages. There's still some mooncalf dung left from last time." Mooncalf dung had proved more effective than his own magical fertilizer. The cabbages had grown far more vigorously. The trouble was quantity. There just wasn't enough to make a proper batch of potions. He'd need to keep mooncalves himself once he had an undetectable extension container. He was about to fetch a small hoe when the door was rocked by frantic knocking. "Hagrid! Hagrid!" someone shouted. The pounding came again, urgent and loud. Lucien flicked his wand and the door flew open. Hermione, Ron, and Harry stood in the doorway. Harry's face was pale. His lips had gone white. He was clutching his left arm. Lucien frowned. "Hagrid's not here. What's wrong? Why are you out so late?" The three of them exchanged panicked looks. Harry's expression grew more pained. Lucien took in the scene and, almost without thinking, raised his wand. Harry's sleeve slipped down, revealing a jagged wound running from his palm to his elbow. Flesh and bone showed in places. Blood dripped onto the floor. The wound looked like a mauling. "Why didn't you go to the hospital wing?" Lucien asked. They stammered. Lucien's guess fell into place. They'd followed the original sequence of events. The three of them, inspired by Harry's father's glory as a Quidditch seeker, had run afoul of something dangerous while trying to avoid Filch. They should have fled screaming, but Harry, having gotten a taste for experimenting with the potions Lucien had taught him, had thrown a handful of beast repellent powder at whatever they'd found. Beast repellent powder worked by driving beasts away with a strong, irritating odor. But a Cerberus wasn't an ordinary animal. It was a magical creature. Throwing that powder at it would only enrage it. And like frightened children who wouldn't tell an adult the truth, they'd run straight to Hagrid for help. Lucien tried not to sound exasperated. He had shown Harry 3 potions in the past few days: burn salve, beast repellent powder, and quick cold relief, and none of them were supposed to get him maimed. "You wait here," he said. He stepped out into the kitchen garden. "Liu Guang." With that summons, the little Cheelin apparated to his side. Lucien produced a small bottle and had Liu Guang tip his head while he collected a mouthful. The books had claimed Cheelin's saliva had powerful healing properties. Liu Guang was a divine beast. The effect should be even better. After bottling the saliva, Lucien sent the Cheelin back to the forest and returned to the hut. He used his wand to guide the saliva from the bottle and applied it evenly to Harry's wound. Flesh knit almost visibly, torn tissue mended and closed. In less than a minute, the horrific gash had vanished without even a scar. Harry stared at his arm in disbelief, as if the pain had never happened. Hermione and Ron looked from Harry's healed arm to the bottle in Lucien's hand, eyes wide. "What's in that bottle?" Hermione asked. "Saliva," Lucien said offhand. "Saliva? Whose?" Ron pressed. "Fang's," Lucien replied casually, ignoring their confusion. Hermione then told what had happened. Sure enough, Harry had shouted, "Don't be afraid. I'll protect you all. Watch my beast repellent powder," and hurled it at the creature. Lucien laughed, part exasperation, part amusement. Clearly his lessons hadn't stuck. Starting tomorrow, he decided, Harry would have intensive training. Chapter 50. Courage is humanity's greatest hymn, Dodo. "Who are the intended users for the anesthetic spray?" Lucien asked. "Wizards, muggles, magical creatures," Harry answered, scribbling as he spoke. "Wrong. Without the protection of magic, a muggle sprayed with this potion would be instantly paralyzed." "Oh, right," Harry corrected his notes. Lucien flipped the page and continued. "What's the usage taboo for the deodorizing elixir?" I don't remember," Harry admitted. "It must not come into contact with an open flame. Otherwise, its effect is no less destructive than a confringo." Silence settled between them. The more Lucien questioned, the clearer the problem became. Harry's talent in potions showed in practical brewing, but his theoretical knowledge was precarious. He knew general effects, but he couldn't remember specific restrictions or details. He'd been using potions like splashing them on faces, improvising. Lucien worried that, left like this, Harry's lack of theory would harm not his magical ability, but his standing in the academic world. Brewing would remain practical, but theory, memorization, dictation, homework, exams, needed work. Harry, still scribbling, suddenly felt a chill and rubbed his sore wrist. "Lucien, thank you for healing me yesterday." "That transparent liquid must have been expensive. I will repay you," Lucien began. Harry had meant to offer galleons, but Lucien had previously refused money and didn't seem to be short of coin. Then I'll go to Gringotts and pick up a few more books. Consider it thanks for your help." "Oh, Hagrid's already gone to Gringotts for me. He should be bringing back the books we talked about," Lucien said with a nod. He didn't refuse. Little Cheelin's saliva was undeniably valuable. Judging by yesterday, it regenerated flesh and bone far more effectively than the Cheelin saliva described in the texts. Little Cheelin was a continuous treasure trove, scales, hair, shed skin, research possibilities everywhere. He could probably trade some of it with Snape. Lucien had seen plenty of rare things in the potions master's office. Harry looked down and asked suddenly, voice tight, "Lucien, did I do something wrong last night?" Lucien blinked. "Why do you ask?" "If I'd run away then, maybe none of this would have happened." Harry's face clouded. "If you'd been bitten because of me, because I showed off, I can't help thinking. Ron and Hermione might have." Lucien didn't offer small comforts. Instead, he asked plainly, "What do you think the purpose of learning is?" "To make myself smarter?" Harry guessed. Lucien tilted his head, nodding once, then shook it. "To understand the world, to solve problems, to fortify your spirit. But knowledge should never be used to show off or to put yourself and your friends in danger." Harry listened, a little dazed, and then lowered his head, ashamed. Lucien's mouth softened into something like a smile. "Still, your courage to protect your companions was right. Courage, by its very nature, is humanity's greatest hymn." Harry looked up, listening. "Of course," Lucien went on, "besides courage and knowledge, you must also learn when to make a strategic, honorable retreat." Harry nodded seriously. "All right, Harry, you memorize everything I've gone through. I'll give you a dictation when I return." Lucien handed him a list of things to commit to memory, then left the cabin. Lucien moved deeper along the edge of the forbidden forest and summoned little Cheelin. "Come, let's see what you found." 10 minutes later, still cloaked by an illusion charm and smeared in cloak oil, Lucien recorded a small group of magical creatures nearby. His enchanted quill kept notes automatically as he watched. Diracals, plump, flightless birds covered in downy feathers. One of them vanished without warning, then reappeared a short distance away. Fascinating. The quill wrote, "Capable of short distance, high-speed teleportation." Lucien remembered a note from a book. Duracalls were recorded in the Muggle world as dodo birds. Muggles had long assumed they were extinct because the birds could disappear at will. That misunderstanding had actually encouraged a movement toward animal protection among Muggles who began to curb overhunting. The Wizarding Confederation had decided it did no harm to let Muggles think these birds gone. Watching the cheerful, fat little birds playing among the undergrowth, Lucien thought of museum skeletons and old records. Not being discovered had its own merits. After jotting down the birds' habits, he prepared to measure their physical data and to test something. He wondered whether animals' affinity toward him was linked to his status as Little Chillin's master, and whether that connection would work on these creatures too. He dispelled the illusion charm and wiped off the cloak oil. His presence was immediately revealed. With a whoosh, the Duracalls vanished. Lucien waited. One by one, slowly and cautiously, they reappeared a dozen meters away and watched him from a safe distance. Their behavior told him what he needed to know. They had not fled entirely. They had run, then returned to observe. That implied an element of trust or curiosity. Perhaps his influence among animals made them less inclined to stay gone. Wild magical creatures were wary, though. He would not approach rashly. "Little Chillin," he called softly. The Chillin's figure appeared at his side. At the sight of the little creature, the Duracall's caution melted into curiosity. They hopped forward, most circling the Keelan, some boldly rubbing against its legs. One tiny chick hopped up to Lucien, its clear eyes bright with interest. Lucien knelt and gently picked up the extinct dodo. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. 51. The Potter Family's Magic Book. "We have potions class tomorrow." Lucien checked the Duracall's bodies while steering a quill to record the data. The plump little birds no longer seemed afraid of him. They flitted around his feet. When he gently picked one up to inspect it, it treated the handling like play. With this affinity for animals, taking close-range measurements was far easier. He no longer had to daze them with a sleeping draught and turn them over and over to measure. Had he been able to approach the mooncalf the last time without burning incense? He must have been distracted then. Little Chillin had just awakened, and he hadn't realized he had acquired animal affinity himself. From now on, when observing magical creatures, he should first hide and record their natural behavior, then summon Gleam to soothe them. Gleam was surrounded by Duracalls, a few fledglings jumping up onto its back now and then. It didn't shoo them away, it licked them gently. The birds perked up and chirped more energetically after. As expected of an auspicious creature. If owning a Cheelin gave him this animal affinity, the Cheelin itself must be even stronger. As soon as Gleam appeared, the Duracalls let down their guard. If Lucien hadn't still been nearby, they would probably have cuddled up to it immediately. Wait, hadn't Gleam said Fang was terrified of it when it visited Hagrid's garden before? Had Gleam frightened Fang? No, Hagrid had mentioned Fang was simply timid. Perhaps Fang was scared of anything unfamiliar, even an auspicious Cheelin. He ought to test that someday. Lucien suppressed his stray thoughts and finished recording the Duracall's data. He collected some scattered feathers, common magical reagents, then patted Gleam. "All right, we can go back now." Inside Hagrid's hut, Harry was murmuring knowledge points under his breath. "Ink cap. Wash the black ink out. Armadillo bile. Filter through an ice crystal funnel 3 times. Hagrid stirred a spoon in the iron pot, cooking a large stew. He'd made extra, knowing Lucien and Harry might stay for dinner. A knock sounded at the door. Hagrid opened it, and Harry's recitation quickened. "Oh, Lucien, you're back. Are you staying for dinner?" Lucien nodded automatically. He stepped inside and froze when he saw a huge, unfamiliar claw rising from the bubbling broth. He'd forgotten Hagrid's tendency toward rustic ingredients. Whatever creature that claw belonged to, it was not something a softening charm could fix. Still, Hagrid looked so pleased he couldn't make excuses to leave, after all the help Hagrid had given him. It was only one meal. If it was unbearable, he could always make some Eastern dishes later. Cooking by magic was quick. "Harry, how's your memorization coming along?" Almost there." Lucien sat opposite him. "Okay, then let's start the dictation." Harry tightened his grip on his book. Lucien, the family magic book I asked Hagrid to get me has arrived. You should take a look first." He pushed a heavy volume across the table. Lucien glanced at the cover. It looked like dragon hide, with a large gilded P embossed on the front. So this was the Potter family's magic book, and it was a hefty one. How had Harry not noticed it at Gringotts? Lucien wondered what it contained. "Why are you looking at me? Start your dictation," Lucien said. "Aren't you going to read it? I can wait a bit." "You write yours, I'll read mine. Perfect." "You have 20 minutes for the parts I asked you to memorize," Harry said. Lucien pulled out the transfigured pocket watch that no longer told the real time and flicked it open. 19 minutes and 55 seconds. Harry snatched up his quill and began to write. Lucien smiled inwardly, such a childish stall to avoid homework, and opened the Potter family book. Good, this was full of alchemical and potion knowledge. No wonder the family had wealth from potions. It seemed talent on Harry's father's side explained some of Harry's aptitude. Lucien skimmed entries: adhesive paste, smoothing water, nose clearer. Among golem binding and medical potions, he paused over a curious formula. Delayed truth, main ingredients: exploding fluid from a horned serpent and acromantula venom. Mix in a ratio of 7.9-2.1, then add auxiliary reagents. It could be made into a solid explosive potion that wouldn't react to fire, but would detonate violently upon a second impact after an initial shock. Inventor: Bull Potter. Notes: only incredibly powerful magic and explosions are honest, and delayed truth is also truth. Lucien's interest was piqued. A delayed impact explosive, triggered by secondary impact, might have applications for special ammunition. If designed correctly, it could create a secondary acceleration effect or simple explosive rounds. Raw materials weren't impossible. There were plenty of acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest, and Hagrid even knew one. Horned serpent's gnaw, exploding fluid, could be obtained from Hagrid or by writing to Newt. Bull Potter had been an eccentric inventor. Flipping the page, he saw a single line in bright red at the top. When refining delayed truth, always pay attention to safety. Ancestor Bull ultimately died in an explosion accident. That warning would have been more useful on the previous page. Lucien read a few more potions, closed the book, and began to mark Harry's dictation. After some crosses and ticks, he said, "Not bad. You tried." Harry exhaled, relieved. "Copy the incorrect points 4 times and redictate those parts tomorrow." "You mean I have to redictate? Should mistakes just be left as mistakes?" Harry hung his head in frustration, then brightened and reached into his pocket. He pulled out 2 small bottles and handed them to Lucien. "Can you check if these are effective?" Lucien opened the caps. Bright Eyes Potion. Snape's class was tomorrow. Lucien grinned at Harry. "This potion is fine. 52. Look at those eyes inside the potions classroom." Lucien toyed with an uneven metal sphere. As the gears turned, grooves and metal pillars on its surface moved in a steady rhythm. He adjusted some internal components with his wand. It was a simplified puppet core he'd made the night before, a power source for golem puppets or mechanical constructs. Because it was rudimentary, its output was limited, probably only enough to drive a mechanical animal the size of a cat or dog. But that was fine. He only needed to create an alchemical mechanical animal with no particular requirements for size or function. The core itself was straightforward: basic alchemical forging and mechanical know-how. The trick was assembling a body and making it move. He would need transfiguration, specifically solidified transfiguration. Otherwise, the construct would only operate for him, and he'd have to cast spells repeatedly to maintain the effect. In the end, refining mechanical animals and mastering permanent transfiguration, which had seemed like 2 separate tasks, were essentially the same challenge. "Lucien, what's that in your hand?" He looked up to find Ron in the front row, staring at the sphere with obvious curiosity. "Just a little toy I made on a whim. You interested?" "You made it yourself? Lucien, you're brilliant." "Ha! My dad's into Muggle technology. He's always tinkering with complicated mechanical things, so I know a bit about them." Lucien nodded. Ron's dad had modified a flying car. Ron himself had been audacious enough to drive Harry to Hogwarts in his 2nd year. He glanced at the seat beside Ron. "Has Harry not shown up yet? Class should be starting soon." Ron shrugged. "I called him this morning. He said he'd sleep a bit more. He was memorizing something last night. I know he wasn't asleep when I went to bed." Lucien felt a little guilty. It seemed Harry really had been working on the memorization task he'd been given. That boy shouldn't be late, right? Today, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor had potions together, and Lucien had been counting on some front-row drama. Bell. Ding. Snape drifted in first. Put away anything unrelated to potions. Roll call begins now. Harry Potter. Silence. The classroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Weasley, where is Potter? Ron, summoned as if by a summons that might as well have been from a king of hell, trembled. Professor. Harry. Harry's got a stomachache and went to the lavatory. Oh, is that so? Snape's voice held the barely concealed displeasure he reserved for tardiness. Gryffindor, 5 points. Lucien heard the anger in Snape's tone. He hoped Harry hadn't forgotten to take whatever potion he needed, and he hoped Harry had removed his glasses. The thought passed. This lesson we will brew a stomach-soothing potion, Snape continued. The smell of entwining stonegrass is pungent. If you are sensitive, tearing and nasal congestion may result. Do not make a fuss when that happens. After 10 minutes of explanation about effects and brewing, Snape finished his instructions and glanced at the empty seat beside Ron. A cold edge crept into his words. Weasley, you would do well to explain this to Potter. He seems to be in great need of the potion. Ron nodded vigorously, then slumped in obvious relief. Lucien smirked inwardly. That sort of tacit understanding between brothers, one daring to lie, the other daring to back it up, was familiar. He resolved to ease their homework load slightly. Ensuring kids got enough sleep was important. He was about to begin processing ingredients when a figure crept into the room. Finally, that boy had arrived. Oh, it seems the one most in need of a stomach-soothing potion has arrived, Snape said flatly. Even though Harry padded in on tiptoe and Snape's back was to the door, the remark carried sarcasm like a blade. Harry visibly stiffened. Snape turned, his lidless gaze fixed on Potter. 18 minutes and 34 seconds late, Potter. Your sense of time has also gone down the... His voice cut off, as if a venomous snake had been interrupted mid-hiss. Harry, who had been hunched, suddenly lifted his head and met Snape's stare. From Lucien's angle, he couldn't see what Snape saw, but the change in Snape's expression was immediate. The cold venom dulled and was replaced by a baffled bewilderment. A long, stunned silence stretched for 10 seconds before Snape managed, in a voice that still sounded cold but oddly strained, Poe, what were you doing just now? Harry blinked. He'd gone to the lavatory, true, but Ron was frantically gesturing, trying to mouth reinforcements. Harry answered without hesitation. The lavatory, Professor. I suddenly had a bad stomachache before class. Ron exhaled a relieved sigh as his shoulders slumped. Snape made a terse sound. Sit down. You can ask Weasley about what I just explained. Harry, a little puzzled by the softened tone, crossed the room and took his seat next to Ron. Lucien caught sight of his clear, emerald-green eyes, no glasses to veil them. A teachable student, he thought, and resumed preparing ingredients while quietly explaining the potion's effects, brewing steps, and the precautions for handling entwining stonegrass. Harry followed along and began to prepare. After only a minute or two, Snape, impatient and probing, loomed over Harry's desk. How should armadillo bile be processed before use? Harry paused with the entwining stonegrass in his hands, but he'd memorized that detail the night before. He looked up and answered clearly, filter it 3 times through an ice crystal funnel. How should crimson blood tree bark be harvested? First cast a freezing charm, then cut with a golden knife once it's cooled. Snape's next question leapt outside the lesson. What is produced by mixing absoluted bird droppings with mandrake root? Harry didn't know. As the sharp scent of the stonegrass began to sting his nose, he felt tears welling and an urge to lower his head. But a memory of Lucien's words flashed in his mind. Even if you cry, you must keep looking at him. Clinging to that, Harry forced himself to hold his neck rigid and meet Snape's eyes. I don't know, he said, voice steady. The answer, almost shouted, did not draw rebuke. Snape only looked at those eyes unshielded by lenses, at the eyes that most resembled lilies, at the eyes rimmed with moisture. 53. There are still many good people in the world. What was Snape thinking as he looked into those eyes? Was he remembering the clear, bright eyes from their first meeting, the shocked and hurt eyes when he had spoken harshly, or the eyes that might never open again? No one knew but Snape. Perhaps he did not even know himself. Aside from the occasional chopping, grinding, and the bubbling of the potions, The classroom was silent. After a long moment, Snape seemed to come out of a reverie. Mixing Diracol droppings with mandrake root yields a silencing powder. The consumer will be unable to speak for a full week. Not knowing is not knowing. Honesty is honesty. Gryffindor, 1 point. You answered 2 questions correctly. Well done, though there's no need to be proud. He hesitated slightly at the last line, as if the compliment felt unfamiliar. Snape then moved around the room to inspect the students' work. As soon as he left, every nearby Slytherin except Lucien turned to stare at Harry with looks that mixed horror and disbelief. If not for fear of Snape, they would have asked outright, "Can you really speak to Snape like that and get points for it? Did he just encourage a student? Professor Snape encouraging someone?" Only Lucien kept his expression neutral. He understood. Snape had simply redirected all the guilt and affection he felt for Lily onto her son. When Snape looked into those emerald eyes, he probably could no longer tell whose face they belonged to. Perhaps Snape didn't even want to tell. He had spared Harry Snape's usual venom and humiliation, cared, however awkwardly, for an adolescent's feelings, and in doing so had forced himself to look at those eyes, even when they sat in James Potter's face. There are still many good people in the world, Lucien thought. I'll ask Snape about that adhesive after class. I saw something in a Potter family magic book that might work on mechanical animals. He did not notice Ron in the front row staring at him, mouth agape. Ron had just realized that Harry's maneuver earlier, what Lucien had suggested, had actually worked. It had avoided Snape's humiliation. Lucien's earlier advice kept replaying in Ron's head. Eyes are the windows to the soul. You have to communicate through eye contact. Show Snape that, though you're a slow learner, you're determined to learn properly. As expected, Lucien finished his potion first. After a quick inspection, Snape awarded Ravenclaw 5 points. Lucien could reliably earn points from the professor each lesson. If he kept it up, maybe Ravenclaw would have a chance at the House Cup. The rivalry for that honor always seemed fiercest between lions and snakes. The little badgers slacked, and the eagles were usually preoccupied with their own pursuits. The House Cup was a fine-sounding collective honor, but it didn't seem to stir everyone equally. Lucien was still thinking when a suddenly furious voice snapped him back to the present. "Weasley, I asked you a question. Why are you staring at the professor? Are you dissatisfied with me?" "Disrespecting the professor. Gryffindor loses 5 points." Lucien turned to see Ron in the front row, trembling. He guessed what had happened and could only think, redheads are truly brave. The bell rang to end class. As Snape collected his things, he called, "Potter, come to my office." Harry froze. Why him? Before he could fully register his nerves, Lucien had already gathered his belongings and stepped forward to pat Harry's shoulder. "Come with me," Lucien said. "I have a question for the professor, too." Harry exhaled in relief. "Thanks for coming with me." Lucien blinked at the odd formality. Why did the boy sound so grateful? They walked to Snape's office together. It was Harry's first time inside. He looked around at the jars and bottles with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Lucien, meanwhile, scanned the shelves with interest. Thunderbird wing feathers, runespore eggs, hippogriff digestive fluid. Snape truly had the resources of the youngest potions master and the connections to obtain rare ingredients. "Grafton, do you have a question?" Snape asked when he saw Lucien enter with Harry, assuming the modest, capable student sought help with potion making. Lucien stepped forward and explained what he wanted to do. Snape considered it for a moment and then answered, precise as ever. "What you describe, something like an adhesive, comes closer to alchemy than everyday potions. Its main flaw is likely its short duration. You could try adding Cerberus blood. The ratio would be... Cerberus blood isn't cheap. Don't bother unless it's absolutely necessary." Snape left the rest implied. Lucien nodded and thanked him. Snape's analysis had been exact. He'd pointed out the weakness and offered a solution. Cerberus blood, Lucien thought. Isn't there one kept upstairs? Why spend money buying any when one might be available? Satisfied, he gathered his things to leave. Passing Harry, Lucien noticed the boy watching him with a complicated expression. Shock, reluctance, unease, confusion, all mixed. Lucien had better things to do than puzzle over it, so he left Harry to face Snape alone. After a long silence, Snape finally spoke. Your potion making today was competent. Harry nodded, uncertain what the comment meant. But there are shortcomings. You should learn from Lucien. Snape's mind went to the improved sleeping draught from the previous encounter. The recipe was known to him and Lucien. In theory, only they could have brewed it at school. Potter had used it to knock out Malfoy. Snape wanted to probe. Children were easier to make slip, and find out whether Lucien had worked with Harry. Harry's next sentence left Snape stunned. How did you know Lucien had been tutoring me? Snape stared at those bright, almond-shaped emerald eyes widening in surprise. The face was infuriating in its innocence. Snape's temper flared. The dark lines on his forehead deepened. Out, now. 54. Timid Yaya. My friend's friend is not my friend. Inside Hagrid's hut, Lucien exhaled with satisfaction. Phew, this permanent transfiguration should be complete. He stared at the metal ring on the table, the ring he had transfigured from a discarded cup. Using the papers and books Professor McGonagall had given him, he'd attempted his first true permanent transfiguration. To his surprise, it had gone exceptionally smoothly. Top-tier transfiguration talent really was something else. With the predecessor's research to consult, his progress was astonishingly fast. Now that the permanent work was done, he could begin refining and assembling mechanical animal forms. He still needed an adhesive. He planned to borrow some blood from Cerberus tomorrow night. Maybe Harry remembered where Cerberus's room was. If not, Hermione would. She had a better memory than Harry or Ron had in those early days. He glanced at the ring again. It was his first permanent transfiguration, and he hadn't infused too much magic. It should revert to its original form after about 10 minutes. He'd test it again to be sure. Hagrid, can you help me with something? Hagrid set Fang down and wiped his hands on his trousers. Course, no trouble at all. Lucien handed him the metal ring. Can you inject a bit of magic into it? No spell, just a pure infusion of ambient magic. Hagrid nodded and, to Lucien's surprise, pulled a small pink umbrella from under his coat and pointed it at the ring. Lucien's mouth twitched. Hagrid's wand was hidden in that umbrella. The sight of a 3 to 4 meter tall half-giant brandishing a pink umbrella like a gentleman in a rainstorm was oddly comical. Hagrid handed the ring back. Lucien inspected it carefully. Stable, no problems. By the way, Hagrid, can I borrow Fang for a bit? I want to take him into the Forbidden Forest. Oh, you can, but don't go too deep. It's dangerous. And Fang's a timid one. He might bolt. Lucien nodded, waved his wand lightly, and the ring floated toward Fang's neck. It expanded just enough to slip over his head, then settled in place. With another flick, he transfigured a ring of spikes along its outer edge and grew a thin chain that extended into his hand. That's a fine bit o' magic. A collar like that suits Fang, my little darling, Hagrid said, clearly pleased. Lucien smiled faintly. He'd meant the spiked collar to protect Fang's neck from bites, not to make him look fierce, but if Hagrid thought it was cute, so much the better. In Hagrid's eyes, every creature was adorable, from Fang and Cerberus to the Acromantula deep in the forest. Perfect. When he went looking for Acromantula, he could collect venom for the delayed truth potion and record the creature for his files. Bidding Hagrid farewell, Lucien led Fang toward the Forbidden Forest. The dog's tail was tucked and his hind legs trembled. If Lucien hadn't noticed, he might have assumed Fang was merely alert. He patted the dog's head and tried to soothe him as they walked a little deeper into the trees. Liu Guang. At the sound of the call, a small, graceful figure appeared beside him. Liu Guang, the little Qilin. Woof! Woo! The Qilin made a cheerful noise. Fang barked instinctively and then whimpered, retreating behind Lucien. The dog was stocky but clearly frightened. Lucien rubbed his head and laughed softly at the irony that even a Qilin, whose presence made other animals friendly, could spook Fang. After some time comforting him, Fang stopped hiding. Just as Lucien was about to let the two animals meet properly, something white streaked toward them and stopped 20 or 30 meters away. Lucien watched it slow to a proud, rhythmic gait. A pure white steed with intricate silver patterns across its flanks and a spiraled horn protruding from its forehead. A unicorn. It had run fast. Its horn, mane, and blood were steeped in powerful magic, Voldemort's favorite kind of trophy, Lucien thought coldly. The unicorn approached Liu Guang with measured grace. After a few seconds of eye contact, it lowered its head, and Lucien tried to reach out. The unicorn turned away from his hand and, after glancing at Liu Guang, turned back again. Each time Lucien moved to touch it, the unicorn shifted its head aside. The animal's behavior was odd until Liu Guang's voice echoed in his mind. "Master, it says it only likes witches." Lucien's mouth twitched. The books were right. Unicorns preferred witches. He wondered, absurdly, whether a wizard in polyjuice potion form as a witch would fool one, or whether the unicorn would gore him to death for the attempt. Since the creature refused to be touched, Lucien didn't bother recording it. He needed specimens of both sexes to make a complete entry anyway. He signaled Liu Guang to persuade the unicorn to move on. "Liu Guang, did you find the acromantula's nest?" he asked. "Yes, master." With that, Liu Guang apparated them closer to the area. They stopped beside a huge boulder draped in white webbing. Lucien slipped into the disillusionment charm and dabbed cloak oil across his robes, then began recording the acromantulas active in the hollow. He'd left Liu Guang and Fang a short distance away at first because Fang was too nervous to come close. There were spiders of every size, juveniles, subadults, and massive adults. Hagrid had released Aragog years ago. He'd found a mate, and the colony had multiplied beyond expectation. Lucien was still taking notes when a dry, creaky voice called out, "Ah, it's been a long time since I've seen such a young wizard." He turned. From the dark of the cave crawled an enormous acromantula, elephant-sized and a pale grayish. Unlike the others, its 8 eyes were milky and sightless. Aragog. He had detected Lucien despite the disillusionment charm. Perhaps losing his sight had sharpened his other senses. The charm and the cloak oil had their limits. Lucien stepped out of his disguise. The smaller spiders paused. There was a momentary kinship in their stillness. They didn't attack. But when Aragog rubbed his mandibles and made a sound, the smaller spiders began to close in around him. "There's something about you," Aragog rasped, his voice like scraping wood. "Something that makes me not want to harm you." Lucien glanced at the circling spiders and then met Aragog's head-on, his tone casual. "Hello, Aragog." "Heh," the great spider chuckled. "You know my name, so you must be Hagrid's friend." Aragog hesitated, then continued. Friends do not harm friends." "Yet Hagrid's friends don't seem to be my friends," Aragog added, the syllables thick with weight. The spider colony's approach slowed. Lucien smiled, unusually relaxed. The tip of his wand sparked with faint electrical arcs that danced in the air. In an instant, Liu Guang leaped to his side, and crimson gold flames erupted around them, a sudden wall of heat and light. "Thank you," Lucien said, calm and almost amused. "Hearing you say that, I'm relieved." Chapter 55, Aragog Burns Out. Smart Fang Aragog's hairs bristled in an instant, and a deep, unnatural chill washed through his ancient body. He couldn't tell whether the sensation came from the strange, flame-fringed creature beside the human or from the smiling young wizard himself. Just as Lucien prepared to raise his wand and little Keelan was about to step forward, Aragog blurted, Wait a minute. I was only joking." He rubbed his mandibles so fast, his movements were a blur. Lucien still held his wand aloft. Electric arcs crackled down its length, growing more violent and obvious by the second. "Oak." Lucien's voice was cool. Aragog didn't understand everything Lucien was saying, but the chill on his body hadn't lessened. If anything, it intensified. I promised Hagrid I wouldn't kill anyone anymore," he stammered, invoking the giant's name in hopes of softening whatever murderous intent he felt from the wizard. Lucien's wand remained pointed. The sparks crawled along it, converging as if poised to strike. "You promised Hagrid," Lucien said, "but did your descendants promise him the same?" At once Aragog understood. He rubbed his lower jaw so hard sparks seemed to fly. He ordered his offspring to disperse, urging them away from Lucien's presence. Hearing their ancestors' command felt like a pardon. The spiders bolted, none of them wanting to stay near the human. The heat already made them miserable, and if not for Aragog's insistence, they wouldn't have surrounded the stranger at all. The man had shown no threat until he lifted his wand. Then instinct and fear told the spiders to flee. Lucien watched the clearing and nodded with satisfaction. "Not bad. Now it's just the two of us." At that, Aragog froze. He would have to face these two creatures alone. Never mind the oddly shaped little beast. Why did this so-called young wizard make him feel so chilled to the bone? "Actually, I came with no ill intent," Lucien went on. just to observe your species. And to collect some venom, by the way. That made Aragog relax a little. As long as they could talk, he thought, things would be all right. Of course, of course. I can feel you mean no harm. Hagrid's friends can't be bad people, Lucien said, amused by the spider's sudden change of tone. He found it funny how Aragog went from proud to obsequious so quickly. Have your descendants split into two groups, male and female, and come by in order from smallest to largest. Aragog agreed quickly. He just wanted the visitor gone. Two small acromantulas crept forward, jostling nervously and neither daring to approach the human first. Heh, don't be afraid. Let me check if your development is normal. Lucien soothed. He levitated the little spiders and began recording their data. Glancing at Aragog, who crouched at the cave's edge, Lucien produced a cedar barrel from a pocket enlarged with an undetectable extension charm, a container about the size of a bottled water cooler, and floated it in front of the old spider. Aragog, don't just stand there. Fill it with some venom. Acromantula venom keeps best in cedar, so the request was practical. Aragog didn't hesitate. He leaned over the rim and began to spit venom into the barrel. Lucien recorded data from acromantulas of every age, and with Aragog's numerous offspring, the sample was the most comprehensive he'd ever gathered on the species. Once he'd also obtained the explosive extract from the horned serpent, he could begin refining the potion he called Delayed Truth. When Lucien tipped the barrel to check its contents, he was surprised to find it over half full. Had Aragog produced that much? He glanced at the old spider sprawled on the ground, his 8 legs splayed weakly, his gray body paler than before. Aragog looked exhausted. The older the acromantula, the more potent the venom, but they still needed to survive. Lucien decided not to take any more. He took a small vial from his cloak, opened it, and drew out a single glowing, transparent drop of Qilin saliva. He guided that drop toward Aragog's mouth. The effect was immediate. The droplet vanished into the spider, and Aragog sprang to his feet as if reborn. The weakness from expelling so much venom drained away. A new vitality flushed through his decrepit frame. His blind gray eyes flickered with a faint light. What is this? Aragog croaked. Lucien put the vial away. Don't worry, I won't take things without giving something in return. I'm leaving now. See you next time. He waved, patted little Qilin, and then both the man and the small Qilin vanished. Aragog instinctively lashed out with a foreleg, then stopped. What had that final remark meant? He'd be back? The old spider's mind raced. Little Qilin sniffed. Master, where did you leave Fang? I left him right here. Why? He's gone. Lucien clicked his tongue. Fang had come out with them. He couldn't have wandered off too far. Little Qilin, split up and search. We can't afford to lose the dog. He also warned the little Qilin about the unicorn they'd seen earlier. If you meet a magical creature like that again, be on your guard. Observe your surroundings, and if danger appears, apparat away at once. Don't hesitate. Lucien was thinking ahead. Quirrell would be hunting unicorns in the Forbidden Forest in a few months, and a growing Qilin would change quickly. He wanted little Qilin to be able to identify magical creatures later, after teaching him some basic knowledge. They searched everywhere. Using little Qilin's sense of smell, they finally found Fang curled up in a hollow in a tree, trembling under a covering of rotting leaves and twigs. Good dog, Lucien said, smiling. You're clever, covering your scent. Fang looked up with wet eyes and a wag of recognition. Sorry, he seemed to say, shivering. I'll make you braised pork ribs when we get back. 50 A History of Magic. Letters to Newt, History of Magic. Lucien turned the pages of his textbook slowly. Suddenly, Professor Binns drifted through the blackboard and into the classroom. As everyone knew, Binns was a ghost. Rumor had it he had been teaching history of magic since Hogwarts began. Back then, he had been alive, until one lesson when he had apparently forgotten to bring his body. Ever since, he'd been teaching in spectral form. Lucien sometimes wondered whether Binns had stayed in the post because he was genuinely the most knowledgeable or because hiring a ghost saved the school the trouble of paying a salary. In my class, I state facts, Binns intoned, his voice a flat, emotionless rasp. His lectures lacked any inflection. The sound was like an old vacuum cleaner and made half the students nod off as if under a drowsing charm. Terry yawned loudly. Lucien propped his chin on his hand and listened with more interest than most. Tiring, isn't it? Terry whispered. Not really. Lucien had his reasons. History, apart from a few colorful unofficial accounts, was often dry, and Binns insisted only on facts, no myths, no legends to make it livelier. Besides, most students secretly wanted teachers to demonstrate impressive magic during class. Ghosts, of course, couldn't perform the kinds of spells that would liven things up. These hour-long theoretical lectures were almost as painful as Quirrell's defense against the dark arts lessons. Seeing Terry start to nod, Lucien murmured, half to him, half to himself. History's important. When you don't understand what's happening now, looking back can turn up useful parallels. Terry blinked. Sure, but have wizards changed much? Magic moves on, doesn't it? Wizards drive magic. Their choices change its course, Lucien replied. The class finally ended, and Binns drifted back through the blackboard before half the students even noticed. Lucien picked up his book and left the classroom. A few steps down the corridor, he called to Hermione, who was ahead of him. Hermione, aren't you waiting for Harry and Ron? Hermione shook her head, her thick brown hair bouncing. I tried to wake them. Harry was muttering something about runespore venom, needing to boil for 5 minutes before adding it, and Ron wouldn't stop saying things about fish and chips, chicken legs, and meatballs. They didn't wake up for me. Lucien smiled. Harry clearly had his head in his studies, even in his sleep. Ron, on the other hand, sounded perfectly content. Yesterday, Harry was telling me about the Cerberus again, Lucien said casually. He couldn't remember which room it's in. Hermione's expression went sharp. Lucien, that creature is dangerous. Even with a healing potion, you shouldn't go near it recklessly. Hermione's vigilance suited her. She did have the leadership streak of the Golden Trio. Lucien felt a small amusement that she considered Cheelin's saliva a healing potion, normal sensible caution. A few days ago, he'd seen Ron trying to coax Fang into giving a bottle of saliva. He thought he should tell Ron to throw it away later. I didn't think you'd forgotten the route. Everyone was panicked at the time, Lucien said. Hermione bristled. I didn't forget. From the trophy room, you turn right, up the stairs, and when the stairs bend, she launched into the precise directions. Lucien listened and nodded. They were still children, and Hermione's memory had given him the information he needed. He planned to borrow some Cerberus blood to refine an adhesive for assembling mechanical animals. The Cerberus was a magical creature, but there was only one housed upstairs, which made the data incomplete. So far, he had recorded 3 magical creatures, a mooncalf, a diracol, and an acromantula. He needed 2 more to finish paying off his pet growth loan. Thanks to the animal affinity brought by his little Cheelin, that task had gotten easier. Once he'd paid the loan, he could write to Newt Scamander to see if he could trade for some Erumpent's exploding fluid. After he made the delayed truth potion, he intended to try developing special alchemical bullets. By the way, Hermione said suddenly, you and Harry seem to have been getting on very well lately. Lucien shrugged. Yeah, he's been asking me questions. No wonder. I've seen him holding small cards and reciting them even while he eats these past few days. Hermione hesitated, then asked hopefully, Are you going to the library this weekend? Lucien thought for a moment. He had a lot of practical work to do, alchemy and constructing mechanical beasts, so he might not make it. If I do, you'll see me, he promised. I'm off now. Your memory is excellent, by the way. Hermione's compliment was meant kindly. He waved and went on his way toward the Forbidden Forest. Later, Lucien sat with a small, fluffy ball in his hands. He weighed it, tossed it up, and it made a soft sound. Guji, the little creature murmured. Lucien wrote with 2 quills at once. One sheet recorded natural history notes. Puffskein, spherical, covered in soft fur, gentle disposition, will not resist when handled. The other sheet was a letter. Dear Mr. Newt Scamander, I am Lucien Grafton. Thank you for clarifying my questions regarding the undetectable extension charm. I have stabilized solidified magic, but I am still working on spatial expansion. Also, I may need some Erumpent's exploding fluid for an alchemical project I'm undertaking. Would you be willing to? He sealed the letter and slipped it into a small satchel, which he hung around the Cheelin's neck. Liu Guang, do you know the address? Can you apparate directly there? He asked. Apparition to an unfamiliar place risks splinching, even for skilled wizards. Though Liu Guang's teleportation far exceeded that of a human, Lucien still asked. Don't worry, Master, the Chelan answered cheerfully. No problem. At most, there might be a slight error. I'll try a few times, or if it's close, just fly. Lucien stroked the Chelan's head. When you go tonight, be careful. Leave early and come back early, and be polite. Liu Guang jingled the satchel. Understood. Master has taught me everything. Knock, knock, knock. Dorset, on a small hillside. A soft knocking echoed through the night. Yes? Who is it? Newt rubbed his head and shuffled out of the bedroom. He had spent the day helping a female Nundu give birth. His old bones were bone-weary. He was about to turn in when the knocking came. Strange, very few people knew his address. Could it be an old friend? The knocking stopped as if sensing him. Newt pushed the door open with a creak and stopped short. Moonlight washed over a magnificent creature standing on his threshold. Pale golden scales that gleamed, a mane of fiery gold that flowed like burning clouds and moved without wind, and a faint veil of golden mist entwined in its hair. What held his gaze most were its eyes, like flawless glazed glass, clear and serene. Newt had expected a person. Instead, a magical creature he had never seen before stood quietly before him. He was understandably dumbfounded. This. Excuse me, are you Mr. Newt Scamander? An ethereal, pleasant voice echoed directly in Newt's mind. He blinked, startled, peering to either side of the doorway. No one else was there, only the creature waited patiently. I have a letter to deliver to Mr. Scamander. I am Newt Scamander. Are you the one speaking to me? Yes, you may call me Liu Guang. I am here to deliver a letter on behalf of my master. A slip of cloud rose beneath the satchel at Liu Guang's throat and lifted out an envelope which floated gently toward Newt. He took the letter and headed back inside. The season's chill was simply too unkind for an elderly man to remain in the doorway. Liu Guang, would you like to come in? Thank you for your invitation. Liu Guang stepped across the threshold as silently as a shadow. When he had communicated telepathically earlier, he had deliberately shaped the voice into an otherworldly sound. It was his master's instruction. Use such a tone with strangers. A childish voice, his master had said, invites underestimation. Newt sat and began to read. The opening lines quickly cleared up the mystery. Dear Mr. Newt Scamander, I am Lucien Grafton. Thank you for clarifying the undetectable extension charm for me. Of course, Lucien Grafton. Dumbledore's correspondence had mentioned the younger student. Lucien must be the one who'd written to Newt about the charm. He had offered help in response, and now Lucien had written back. Newt smiled inwardly. The boy clearly had an impressive grasp of charms and alchemy for his age. But the messenger, what on earth was it? Newt glanced up at Liu Guang with the curiosity of a lifetime devoted to studying the unknown. Is something the matter, Mr. Scamander? Liu Guang asked kindly. Ah, no. Newt's socially anxious instincts made him shake his head. Talking with a creature like this felt odd. He loved magical creatures and had spent his life among them, but experiencing direct communication in this way was new. He read on. Lucien's questions showed a solid understanding of the undetectable extension charm. He was now pursuing the finer technical details. But when Lucien asked about the erumpent, about handling its explosive fluid, Newt's brow tightened. Erumpent fluid was hazardous. A student, even an advanced one, should not handle it lightly. And at the letter's end, Lucien mentioned that his pet was a very unusual creature and asked Newt not to tell anyone. Newt agreed entirely. After years of advocacy, he knew how some wizards coveted rare creatures as curiosities or sources of materials. Although many had come to appreciate the need for protection, extremists remained. Newt began to write a careful reply, answering Lucien's questions on the undetectable extension charm and politely refusing advice on the erumpent fluid. I'm afraid that dealing with such dangerous substances is best left to those with sufficient experience and understanding of the species. If you remain interested after you graduate, I would be glad to discuss it further. He had just finished when Tina padded into the living room, rubbing her eyes and stifling a yawn. She found Newt up late with letters again and wondered whether Dumbledore had written. She moved toward where Fawkes would be, but instead she froze. Newt, who's this? Ah, Tina, this is, Newt floundered. That's the pet of the student Lucien Grafton, who asked about the undetectable extension charm. He explained. Tina paused, thinking of Dumbledore's mention. Oh, what kind of creature is it? Newt stopped writing and glanced between Tina and Liu Guang. He honestly couldn't name it. If he had to compare, it bore a vague resemblance to the Eastern Qilin he had once rescued decades ago, but it differed in almost every respect, in appearance and in the strange, gentle way it communicated. I don't know, Tina. It says its name is Liu Guang. Tina's eyes widened in surprise. Through marriage to Newt, she'd learned a great deal about magical beasts. She could usually name species from half a glance. And yet Newt, the world's most renowned magizoologist, didn't recognize this one either. Then it really is rare. Wait, you said it says? Can it speak? Good evening, beautiful lady. Liu Guang's voice slipped into Tina's mind, the same ethereal tone. She blinked, startled, then laughed with delight. Tina was warm and unabashedly sociable, a stark contrast to Newt's shyness. Liu Guang, did I say your name right? You pronounced it correctly. That's good. I'm curious. You called me beautiful. Why? Liu Guang's mind ran through the instructions his master had given him. He recalled the proper reply. I can sense the good and evil in living things. Your heart is kind. You have a beautiful soul. Tina chuckled. How lovely. Did your master teach you that? My master teaches honesty and politeness, Liu Guang answered. Tina grew more interested at once and more curious about Lucien, the boy who raised such a considerate attendant. Thank you for the compliment. Could you tell your master that he's welcome to visit here? I'd be very pleased to meet him. Liu Guang felt satisfaction at the thought. The warmth in Tina's mind made him sure his master's lessons were right. He wanted to suggest to his master that perhaps fewer facts and more anecdotes would be easier to remember, but he held the thought back. Tina, that boy should be preparing for his NETs. Let's not disturb him just now, Newt said quietly, returning to his letter. Tina glanced at her husband as he picked up his pen again and chuckled softly. Then he can come on holiday, or after he graduates. She nudged Newt playfully. You just don't want to meet strangers, do you? Ravenclaw dormitory. Lucien glanced back at his roommate, Terry, and confirmed he was still fast asleep. He stroked Glimmer, now the size of a house cat, while reading Newt's reply. The expansion of space lies in the nodes inscribed by the undetectable extension charm. Different permutations and combinations of the charm produced very different effects on space. If Lucien tried to explore that himself, it would be slow, incremental work. With Newt's guidance, however, many problems were already solved. He could begin refining undetectable extension items, and it would be even more useful once such items could hold living things. Family heritage ran deep. Between the Potter family's potion alchemy and the Scamander family's mastery of undetectable extension, ancient wizarding lineages really did possess enviable, unique knowledge. Lucien smoothed the letter and admitted it to himself. Maybe Harry could lend him some magical books. Better yet, if he could borrow reference material from several classmates, he'd have even more resources. Knowledge was never enough. When he read that Newt had politely refused his offer to trade for a rampant exploding fluid, Lucien frowned but didn't blame him. Newt's reason made sense. Anyone handling such things should have a solid understanding of magical creatures, and Newt was acting out of principle. Lucien pulled out a thick stack of notes and materials, observation records on mooncalves, diracals, acromantulas, puffskeins. The pile was nearly half his height. That should prove some knowledge, right? If he copied the documents and sent them to Newt, perhaps he could convince him. He could add records of other creatures to bolster his credibility. For example, the Cerberus. There was only one, and his notes weren't extensive enough to meet a loner's standards, but they might help. If necessary, he could make another trip into the Forbidden Forest for a unicorn sighting. Records on a unicorn would look convincing. Glimmer, can you tell me about your visit with Mr. Newt? He asked. The little Qilin recounted everything in detail, from knocking to their brief conversation to politely saying goodbye and closing the door. As Lucien listened, his smile widened. Newt had managed not to examine Glimmer closely, despite how obviously rare, and perhaps even unknown, Glimmer's appearance was. Newt was socially awkward but passionate about magical creatures. Perhaps Glimmer's almost too human manner made Newt hesitate on their first encounter. Next time you deliver a letter to Mr. Newt, try to chat with him a little, Lucien said. He'll be very interested. He folded the reply and looked up at the moon. He should find the Cerberus tonight, observe, record, and take some blood for potion work. Let's go. I'll show you something fun. He put Glimmer into his pet space, left the dormitory and Ravenclaw common room, and began his first nocturnal walk through Hogwarts. Disguised with a disillusionment charm and a smear of cloak oil, Lucien wandered the castle corridors at an easy pace, stairs, portraits, the faint hush of the night. Following the route Hermione had described, he moved toward the room where the Cerberus was kept. Meow. A gaunt, dark gray cat sat at the far end of a corridor, bulbous yellow eyes scanning back and forth for rule breakers. A thin, pale man with straw-colored hair followed, carrying an oil lamp, patrolling like any squib duty. Lucien didn't hide. He simply walked past. Neither the cat nor the man noticed him. After masking his shape, sound, and scent, an ordinary house cat couldn't detect him. He smirked. The school forbade students from being out at night, yet they'd put a squib on patrol. Was that really a deterrent? He reached the door and murmured, Alohomora. After it unlocked, Lucien produced a small vial of sleeping draught from his pocket, uncorked it, and released its vapors into the room. He waited 2 or 3 minutes for it to spread, then donned a light, refreshing mask to clear his senses, and entered. A soundproofing charm sealed the room so no one outside could hear. A dusty lampstand transformed under his wand into a violin. As he stepped forward, the violin began to play soft, beautiful music on its own. The scent of orchids filled the air. The music deepened the snoring until it became heavy and regular. In the center of the room lay a massive pitch-black dog with 3 ferocious heads. Each mouth dripped viscous saliva. Fluffy, Hagrid's pet Cerberus. The dog loved music. The more beautiful the melody, the more it relaxed. Lucien nodded to himself. Between the violin and the enhanced sleeping draught, Fluffy should be in a very deep sleep. He didn't let his guard down. He cast several layers of Protego and Impedimenta around himself and muttered other protective charms. Then he released the little Qilin. Glimmer, keep watch. Yes, master, Glimmer replied. Lucien took out paper and a pen and began to record the Cerberus's physical characteristics. After a few notes, he drew an iron bottle from his cloak. He needed a little more blood. He hadn't refined an adhesive before, so there'd be some inevitable loss. He touched his wand to the Cerberus's hind leg and made a tiny incision. The blood flowed slowly. He guided the stream steadily toward the bottle's mouth. Fluffy's nose twitched. The muscular bulk that had been so relaxed tightened as if an instinct had been roused. Without opening its eyes, one of the heads lunged and bit. The teeth, rimmed faintly with dark mist, hadn't yet reached the protective charms around Lucien when a swift golden shadow shot out from beside him and struck the Cerberus, knocking it backward. Lucien slipped the bottle away and continued to write, calmly noting, Cerberus, extremely sensitive perception. 3 furious barks ripped from the dog, and a wash of golden flames roared to life, filling the room. Lucien stood within the fiery blaze, quill moving as if the flames meant nothing. His notes remained unscorched. When the Cerberus's pained whimpers rose, he set his pen down. Glimmer, that's enough, he said. 59. The peculiar style of the Qilin, the blood of the 3-headed dog, obtained when Lucien spoke. The flames in the room instantly died back. Little Qilin padded to his side, eyes warily fixed on Cerberus. Fluffy. The creature looked pitiful. Its dark fur was singed black, where the pure flames had licked it. Fiery petals still clung to patches of its coat, and the pain made it tremble. Lucien patted the Qilin's neck, telling it to put out the remaining flames. Once the fire was gone, Cerberus's injuries were shockingly plain. The pure flames had been so hot that flesh in thinner areas had nearly burned through, revealing white bone beneath. In a matter of seconds, the ferocious Cerberus had been humbled, reduced to whimpers. Fluffy laboriously rolled onto its side and, ignoring its pain, exposed its softer belly in submission. Lucien read the gesture correctly. The dog had yielded. The wounds were serious. Even a powerful magical beast would struggle to heal from burns like these naturally. This was Hagrid's pet. He didn't intend to kill it, only to make sure it would not attack again. After a moment's thought, he directed little Qilin to tend the creature. The Qilin approached cautiously. Fluffy trembled but dared not move. Instead, it stuck out its tongue and gave a fawning little grin. Little Qilin looked down and, Tui, spat a transparent globule of saliva square into the middle head's mouth. Lucien froze. He'd always known Chillin's saliva was a potent healer, usually collected in a vial for careful use. But seeing the beast simply spit straight into another creature's mouth struck him as oddly alpaca-like. Still, the effect was immediate. Fluffy's charred fur sloughed away and was quickly replaced by glossy new hair. The deep wounds began to knit. The most severe areas healed more slowly, but the improvement was undeniable. Little Chilin came back to Lucien's side and lifted its head proudly. "Master, I healed it." Lucien almost told it to be a bit more dignified when spitting, but then decided there was no way spitting could ever look elegant. He turned instead toward the trapdoor that had been concealed in the wall. The heat from the fire had burned the door to ash, leaving a dark, gaping hole. Fluffy made no move to block him. It squatted to the side, panting, as if it had forgotten its post. After its beating and the calming influence it now felt from Lucien and the Keelan, the three-headed dog seemed as meek as any large household dog. Peering down, Lucien saw nothing but darkness. No devil's snare, no other obstacle. Dumbledore must not have set the Mirror of Erised below yet. So whatever Cerberus had been meant to guard, there was no longer a challenge in the shaft. Lucien glanced back at the dog and grumbled inwardly. What exactly had it been guarding? A door? With a resigned shrug, he produced an unused tin can from his pocket, waved his wand, and transformed it into a makeshift door, fitting it into the hole. A few flicks later added a semi-permanent solidification charm. It would do until he could replace it properly. He smoothed away the burn marks from the room with a series of small spells. Then he fetched paper and pen to record the creature's data. With Fluffy so cooperative, observation was easy. On command, it lifted a paw, opened a jaw. Lucien inspected the teeth. The sharp fangs were strikingly white. The dark aura that had once coiled around them was gone. Perhaps little Chilin's pure flames could burn curses and toxins away, removing the dark art's influence from Cerberus's teeth. But he noticed faint wisps of black mist rising again from the gum line, hovering like a memory. So the corruption regenerated. The dark art's aspect inherent to Cerberus meant that victims of its bite could not heal on their own and required potions. Lucien jotted that down, then put his notes away. He uncorked an iron vial and drew blood. Fluffy did not resist. Lucien took only as much as he needed for his adhesive concoction. Having achieved his goal for the night, he left the room, tossing a huge rib bone to the dog as a small recompense. A few minutes later, two figures hurried toward the same room from another corridor. "Dumbledore, I told you that Cerberus is dangerous. It shouldn't be kept in the castle." Snape's voice was tight with worry. "Before, Potter and his friends got lost and went here," the other replied evenly. "What if something had happened? Severus, don't be agitated. From what I've learned, the problem wasn't serious." Snape's eyes were dark as he looked at Dumbledore. The portraits and ghosts in the castle were the headmaster's informants. Through them, Dumbledore always seemed to know most of the goings-on. On both previous occasions, spirits had alerted him that someone had entered the three-headed dog's room. Snape drew a long breath to steady himself. "Not serious, meaning there was a problem," he said. "Correct?" Dumbledore nodded. "I know you want to ask about Potter. He was injured, but he has already recovered." When Snape first heard that Harry had been hurt, his breath had caught. Learning the boy had healed eased him. Still, he snorted. "I wasn't asking about Potter. Keeping a creature like Cerberus in the school is simply too dangerous." Dumbledore only smiled. He did not tell Snape that the ghosts had said Harry had been seriously hurt and then had left the castle. Dumbledore had reasoned the trio must have run to Hagrid, and when he later asked Hagrid, the gamekeeper had said the boy had appeared perfectly well, talking cheerfully with Lucien and his companions. Dumbledore suspected Lucien had provided aid and quietly grew more curious about the boy. They opened the door into the room. Everything appeared normal, except Cerberus, who was contentedly gnawing on a huge rib bone. Dumbledore entered the room first, with Snape right behind him. They found the three-headed dog gnawing on a rack of ribs. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "Hagrid shouldn't be feeding him at this hour, should he?" Dumbledore chuckled. "Perhaps the guest who just left is a dog lover." Snape ignored the joke, and the two of them approached the Cerberus. Fang, sensing Dumbledore among the newcomers, did not act defensively. Both men noticed the burn marks across his hide, large and small. But whatever the wounds had been, they were closing on their own. They exchanged a frown. A creature with a resistance like this would shrug off ordinary spells, and common flames wouldn't even singe that fur. "This doesn't look like something some students could pull off," Snape said pointedly, hinting at Quirrell's odd behavior this term. "The fiend fire involved must be powerful." "Dumbledore, check Fang's injuries first to see if any potions are needed," Snape said. Dumbledore's mind flicked for a moment to an old acquaintance and the fiend fire incident he remembered, the blue sea of fire that had nearly swallowed the city. Seeing that Dumbledore was undisturbed, Snape's expression darkened further. The old man always seemed to hold more information and more plans than he let on. Snape stepped forward to examine the dog. Fang suddenly bared his teeth and gave a low growl, covering the ribs possessively. Snape's face soured. This dog was guarding his food. "He only trusts you and Hagrid," Snape said. Dumbledore shook his head and began to soothe Fang while urging Snape to hurry with the examination. The more Snape checked, the stranger the injuries looked. These wounds were severe, possibly to the bone and internal organs at first, yet they're mostly healed now. He did not say what he thought next. At this rate, had they arrived any later, the wounds might well have healed entirely on their own. "Fang's natural regeneration is not this fast," Snape added. "Someone skilled in healing was involved." Dumbledore nodded. "It would take unusual skill. The visitor must know advanced restorative magic." Snape crouched to look at the dog's teeth. "And the curse bound to them has been almost entirely stripped. That's not an ordinary method, either." "Indeed, Severus. Let's see if there are any other clues." They began searching the room. When Dumbledore stepped to the trapdoor, the lenses of his half-moon spectacles flashed as if something had caught his interest. Solidified transfiguration? With a quick flick of his wand, the door panel reverted into a small iron can. Holding it, Dumbledore examined the work and marveled. Impressive transfiguration, and the healer's skill as well. That combination rings a bell. He thought of the reports from the castle ghosts and from Hagrid. Harry had most likely been healed by Lucien, and Lucien's transfiguration talent had shown itself before. Dumbledore increasingly suspected the boy was unusual and decided he would have a brief word with Lucien at this week's afternoon tea. He casually transformed the iron can back into the door panel, reinforcing the work with a semi-permanent solidified transfiguration before restoring it to its original state. "Grafton has been tutoring Potter recently, hasn't he?" Snape offered casually. Dumbledore smiled. "I know." Snape fell silent. Whatever he tried to say, it felt like Dumbledore already knew the answer. Gurgle, gurgle. In the kitchen, Lucien poured 7 milliliters of Cerberus blood into his cauldron. The potion thickened and ran dark red. The previously bubbling surface stilled. While it cooled, he did not idle. Lucien set to work shaping the parts for a mechanical animal. Each small piece received a semi-permanent solidified transfiguration so that, with enough magical charge, the construct could remain fully functional. He glanced at Fang, who lay boredly nearby, and smiled. "I'll make you a companion to play with, to make up for last time." Fang, unable to understand the words, still looked up at the cauldron with interest. When the smell of ribs vanished, there was a hint of disappointment in his lowered head. By the time the adhesives had cooled, Lucien, following the book's instructions and his own design, waved his wand. Parts and alchemical components flew and assembled in midair. From the core out to the torso, limbs, head and tail, everything snapped into place. Within breaths, a sleek white mechanical dog sat in the room, gears clicking and fittings sliding into place. "Woof," the contraption barked. Fang leapt to his feet and skidded back a short distance to observe the strange newcomer. Lucien flicked his wand and made the mechanical dog roll, jump, and sit on command. After a few successful somersaults, he put his wand away, pleased. "Not bad. My dog can really do a backflip." He checked the system. "Congratulations, host. You have created a controllable mechanical animal and mastered semi-permanent solidified transfiguration. Mechanical transfiguration pocket watch loan has been repaid. Because of the host's diligence and exceeding the loan requirements, you have earned 1 customized loan opportunity, up to the monthly loan level." a pleasant surprise. Normally, only daily loans could be customized by the borrower. Higher-level loans were decided by the system. Since the maximum available customization was a monthly loan, Lucien resolved to take a monthly loan. The difficulty would be greater, but so would the rewards, and he had just finished the monthly requirement for the Transfiguration pocket watch. The diligent little gardener loan still demanded planting 10 biting cabbages, routine care over time, while the pet growth loan had only one magical creature left to find, which he could obtain in the Forbidden Forest. Lucien considered his strengths. His analysis of the Transfiguration pocket watch had accelerated his progress in alchemy and solidified Transfiguration, and one of his main goals this year was to master all Transfiguration knowledge and to pioneer new directions. He closed his eyes for a moment and chose. His customized monthly loan would be related to Transfiguration.